Hello, welcome back to the Peaceful Creatives podcast, or potentially welcome to the podcast if you're watching over on YouTube. I actually decided to start recording my podcast episodes as videos and uploading them to a brand new YouTube channel. So if you are actually listening to the podcast in audio format and you prefer to watch, I tend to prefer to watch my content, my videos, so you can do over on YouTube, which is exciting. I'm going to see how it goes. I have lots of ideas for videos I would love to create, and I'm just going to see. The main thing that I love about my business is making it as easy as possible. So I want to experiment. I want to see with a little bit of space that I have if I can record videos, if I can make videos that I really like and that I think you will really like. So yeah, I'll put the link to that over in the show notes. So today I'm going to talk about launching. And the reason I want to jump in and talk about launching is because I have just wrapped up my final launch of 2025 for my group program, Book Not Busy, which is my program as a mentor for creative service providers to get booked up peacefully with dream clients. And the launch was great. I am now in a rhythm. I think this is my 12th or 30th, I think it's the 12th time I've launched this program in some sort of format. It was originally a membership. It's kind of evolved to be more of a mentoring program now, but it means that over time I've really got used to the process of launching. I've got used to my messaging and my positioning and how I share. But I am here talking to you as a creative service provider, and I want to share why I don't launch in my creative business, which is my design studio. The two businesses are very different. I have design services and I have my mentoring services, and to me they are two incredibly different businesses. One of them I think does require some form of launching, so having a program, a group program, I really think it makes it easier to launch, which is why I do. I do not think you have to launch if you have a creative service business. And I kind of believe that we have been told that we should be launching regardless of what we offer. The reason I think that is the case is because we have got used to this cycle of how people buy, how people share their offers. And I think we've got into a process where we kind of expect launches. And so for some businesses, it makes sense to do that. For me, as a person who wants to maintain as much peace and as much calm and stay as stress-free as possible in my business, launching to me just isn't a viable option for selling my design services because, well, I'll go into that a little bit more about the reasons why I don't launch. But I have found, especially with the creatives that I work with in my program and one-to-one, there does feel like because there is so much noise and talking about launching and, what that looks like and how it can work for your business, there is a bit of a pressure to start launching, to build that into your sales process in your business. And I guess I want to share this as an affirmation and an encouragement, and also a proof that you don't have to launch if you don't want to. And actually, as a person who does and doesn't launch in two different businesses, why I actually recommend to maintain more peace, to keep a steady schedule, that you don't launch. So let's jump into the reasons why I personally don't launch my creative services. And I'm going to jump in with the main one, which is I don't really love launching. It's not my favorite thing to do. It definitely isn't. When it comes to tasks that I do within my business, it's not in my favorite 3 or 5 or maybe even 10. It definitely just isn't my favorite thing to do. And like I said, I think as a mentor and sharing a group program, it is fairly necessary to build launching into that system and into the sales. And as a mentor and as someone who runs a group program, I have got used to selling my program that way and launching and having launch cycles and things like that. When it comes to the actual the headspace that launching takes, the energy that launching takes, the mindset that you find yourself in when you're in a launch, I just don't love it. I just don't love how I feel when I'm in a launch. It can feel very vulnerable. It can feel very visible, like you can feel like you have to spend this kind of 6-week, 4-week, even 2-week period, depending on what it is that you do, being a person who is talking about, and listen, I'm just going to preface this by saying I love talking about my business and I have no problem with showing up consistently and being visible and confidently talking about what I do. I think there is a difference between doing that consistently and being in a very intense launch period where it can feel quite high stakes. It can feel like you are putting everything out on the table and there's this limited period where people can get in and, and work with you. And even though, like I said, 12 launches in, my process is pretty slick. I have the emails that I refine and, I have the messages that I feel really good about, and I can talk about the program. I can talk about the program with other people, and I have fairly consistent, successful launches for Book Not Busy. Still, seeing that as a process does not make sense for me in my creative business, because I still get that feeling, even when it does well, that your nervous system is always sort of tested in a launch. There are things that just make you feel a little bit on edge. I kind of spend this 6-week period, like I said, feeling quite, almost waiting for the next thing to happen. One really rough example is I've been wanting to redo my website for ages, and I redesigned the sales page for this launch. But because I was in this launch period, I felt a bit stuck and frozen. I can't do my website now because I have to wait until the launch is over. And it's little things like that. I feel like I maybe can't experiment when I'm in a launch. I feel like I can't make any shifts or any changes. I feel like I have to be a very consistent presence and a very consistent person. And honestly, I don't think that's necessary to run a really successful creative service business. The way I do this in my design studio is I am consistently visible and present and, available in terms of people being able to get in touch and book a call. But it means that I can maintain my consistency in terms of my stress levels and my mindset and my headspace behind the scenes, because the way I show up is very relaxed. It can be twice a week. It can be an email every other week. It can be just by having a visible website that is on the internet. And because I don't particularly love the process, I don't feel like I have to build it into a different business that maybe isn't built the way that needs a launch. I kind of also want to jump into the pressure that launching creates, because I know in my design studio, I book this many clients a year, and that is all I need to be booked up for an entire year. So sometimes it's 8, sometimes it's 10. It really depends on how I build my schedule for the year ahead. For example, I have a little bit more space now because my son's gone to school, so I have a little bit more capacity if I want to take on more projects. With launches, if I were to build my services into a launch, that really puts the pressure on bringing those clients and bringing those projects in that very specific period, which puts quite a lot of pressure on that period. Again, as a mentor and running a program, it's very different because people tend to buy in a launch. It makes sense as a sales process to kind of open the doors and be like, okay, now's the time to join, feel free to come in. With a service, the way I work with my clients, it's very much based on when they feel ready to work on their brand design, their website. And, for you, it might be they want to book their brand shoot to line up with a launch that they're having, or they want to launch their copy alongside the website that they're launching. Things are very much based on their personal milestones. And I like the idea of people it's not even an idea, this is what has worked for me for years and years. I like people being able to book their inquiry calls when it feels good for them, and then booking a project that works for them, and their deadlines. Whereas with a launch, it very much creates this pressured situation where, first of all, you have to book as many projects as you need in that launch period, and people have to book in at a time where potentially they're not completely ready, just because that's when the books are open. And I think it creates a cycle of you and your clients both having to work to a schedule that might not work for either of you. So I guess what I'm saying is there is a pressure, And there's also this reliance on, these cycles of sales and people booking in when you have your doors open and people seeing that your doors are open. What if one of your dream clients is like on holiday when you're in launch and just completely missed that they could sign up or, work with you at that point? It almost creates this pressured kind of sales system that really, really relies on timing. I guess with that as well, my other point around the pressure and the cycle of a launch is you could plan your launches a year ahead. I could put in my calendar, I'm going to launch my website design service in March and July and September, for example. And what if it gets to that point and I don't feel up to it? A really good example is earlier this year, I found out I was anemic, which I didn't really take that seriously. I didn't think it could affect me that much. And throughout the year, what I've found is I've had quite a lot of brain fog and symptoms that have, made working a little bit more difficult. It's definitely not the most serious thing anyone could ever deal with, but it has affected my energy, it's affected my concentration, it's affected my capacity. And with that in mind, yes, with my launches for Book Not Busy, it has meant I've had to kind of work through periods where I will probably have needed a little bit more rest or wasn't in the right energy or the right headspace to do those things. When it comes to my design studio, my projects have just been booked in at the point where I have the capacity. People just get in touch when they need to work with me and they can get booked into my schedule and I can work with the spaciousness and the flexibility that I've built into that schedule. And what I mean by this is I then don't have to rely on my energy, on my consistency, and on me as a sort of like human being who gets sick and who needs more rest sometimes and who sometimes needs to slow down. I don't have to rely on me as a human to get booked up. I don't have to rely on how I feel to book projects in and to get booked up for 6 months or for a year. Whereas with launching, if you have planned in those almost like sales cycles, those like repeatable cycles that come up every few months, it really does mean that in those times you kind of have to be on and you have planned that in because your sales rely on it and your income relies on it. And these are things that I just don't want to have to worry about in my creative service business. I really want to feel as peaceful as possible. I want to feel as calm as possible and as stress-free as possible. And so if I'm getting to a point where I have to go into a launch to make sales and I'm not feeling like that's something I want to do, that takes away my peace, that takes away the calm that I feel and adds more and more stress. And my final point about why I don't launch my creative services is I really don't need to. And that is the main reason. I really don't need to launch my creative services. I've kind of mentioned throughout this episode that I do tend to have people getting in touch who will book in 3 to 6 months in advance. I can get my schedule booked up when they are getting in touch by using marketing methods that feel a little bit calmer, by feeling really confident about my schedule and sticking to that schedule and having really great boundaries, and just having sales systems that work well for me, that are things that I like doing, that are things that are a little bit more repeatable without so much energy. And I believe the same is true for any creative service provider. I think if you don't want to launch, don't. And by the way, if you do, that makes sense too. But for me, I don't need that as a process. I don't need that as a kind of like marketing engine or like a sales system, whatever the term would be right now, to get booked up with design clients. So I really believe that is kind of where we draw the line. Like, I don't think any more has to be said aside from I don't really have to do it. And like I said, the same is true for you. So let's have a little chat about what works for me instead. What is the thing that means I can get booked up peacefully without launching and with a more like steady, ongoing, energy-aligned system that gets me booked up and keeps me booked up long-term as well. So I've mentioned a few things here, but I do really like to have a consistent marketing plan that doesn't rely on my energy and my capacity. And that tends to mean that I have kind of I try and keep my social media consistent. I did for a very long time when I relied a little bit more on social media. And if you can find a system for Instagram or LinkedIn or wherever you have your like short form content that feels really calm and that you can do, for example, in Book Not Busy, we do our month of magnetic marketing where we spend one afternoon creating a month's worth of content. That can be a much calmer way to find clients, connect with the right people, and get the inquiries in that get you booked up without having to have this huge burst of energy, this huge burst of, this is what I do, get into my books right now. It can feel a lot more calm and steady, and also gives your clients the opportunity to jump in when it makes sense for them. I think something that is really important here is having very, very clear messaging and positioning behind your marketing as well, so it can feel very calm. I think there's nothing worse than sitting down to try and, create some posts or write an email or, create some pins, whatever it is that you're doing, and just having no ideas whatsoever. If you can feel really confident in who it is you're talking to, what it is you offer, what it is that you're selling, and kind of what that looks like, all of those things will come together and make a much more peaceful marketing process that again can switch this like hectic, sometimes chaotic, and sometimes most of the time very high energy, high capacity launch method for something that is much more evergreen, much more repeatable, and easier for you to manage in terms of your energy. It is then also about being steadily visible without necessarily having to be visible or think about your visibility every single day. For example, one of the things that I've built long term into my business that maybe is something that could take a year or two to really build as like a solid part of your business is something like Pinterest, where I can put a little bit of effort into creating pins and sharing my work on there. And it creates a quite long-term cycle of people being able to see my work and, find what I do and get in touch whenever works for them. This can also work on Instagram, but it does maybe require, like I said, it can just be an afternoon a month, but a little bit more consistency there. It can also be you being actively visible, so engaging with other people and, making yourself a presence for the people that you really want to work with online. Again, like engaging with other people's content and showcasing yourself and showcasing your work and talking about the things that make you really excited and the things that you're really confident in. All of these things can build that consistent visibility, again, without these huge bursts of visibility when it comes to launching. So just to wrap up, what this means for you is you can absolutely get booked up very, very peacefully without launching. And if you are getting pulled to feeling like launching is something you have to do, I really just want to encourage you and acknowledge that that really isn't true. If it's something that you think you'll enjoy and that you want to experiment with or build onto, by all means, go ahead. But if you are a person who potentially, like me, prefers things to feel a bit more steady, a bit more calm, a lot more peaceful, then I guarantee that launching is not necessary for your business to thrive and for you to get booked up peacefully as well. I don't even teach launching as a concept, as a sales method, especially in Book Not Busy, my program, but also in my one-to-one services. I don't recommend launching because I do think it can zap a lot of the calm and a lot of the peace. And again, it does create these repeatable cycles that need almost like fuel from you as a person that potentially leave you in a cycle that you can't end. What we really want is repeatable, peaceful systems that feel easy for you to implement, that feel easy for you to stay visible without always having to be like on and be like the loudest person in the pack. You can really, really get booked up peacefully without launching. So that kind of ends that conversation. If you don't want to do it, you don't have to do it. And finally, I just want to share, your business doesn't have to run on urgency. And as soon as we start to think of urgency as a key factor, I believe that is where some of the stress and some of the chaos can seep in, because we end up jumping onto this kind of like hamster wheel or this roller coaster of need to get this booked in now, need to do this, need to do this. And that really isn't where our headspace and where our creativity is going to thrive. Instead, if we can create, again, a very calm, booked up system where you have a great pipeline of clients and you are booked up 2 to 3 months ahead, Not only does it take away the urgency and make you immediately feel calmer and more steady and more secure, it also gives you the space to be able to experiment with new things and to try different platforms, maybe try your hand at a little launch here and there. But what I would say is having an almost evergreen booked up schedule of projects and clients is the thing that's going to facilitate making launching more easy. I can launch Book Not Busy, I can launch as a mentor, because I have the space and the peace from being booked up with 3 to 6 months of design clients in my design studio. I get to build new things and experiment with different businesses and different projects, again, because I have that space and that flexibility from being booked up. And that's really what it comes down to, is if you want space to experiment, it makes sense to have a booked up schedule of clients first, create the space to experiment, and then use that space. I really hope you have enjoyed this episode. I felt a little bit nervous about talking straight after a launch about how it's like not my favorite thing to do, but I'm so happy with how the launch went. I actually just closed up as I was recording this video. So let's see if there's any last minute pals inside Book Not Busy, but also I will be back with a brand new episode of the Peaceful Creatives podcast next week. Let's see if I can make a habit in recording videos for YouTube. I really hope I can, because I am quite excited about video. If you want to find more from me, you can over at Gatto Creative Mentor on Instagram, or mentor.gattoweb.com is my website. I would also love to hear from you. If you want to have a chat about your business, feel free to drop me a little message over on Instagram. Love a voice note as well. And yeah, I'll be back with you next week.